The smell hit me first. I was standing in a boutique candle shop in downtown Boston, laughing with my friend Sarah about overpriced lavender sachets, when someone lit a match near the fireplace display. The sulfur smell mixed with burning cedar, and suddenly, I wasn't there anymore. My knees buckled. The wooden floor beneath me became dirt. The laughter around me morphed into screaming. And I felt it, the searing, unbearable heat of flames licking up my legs. "Oh my God, are you okay?" Sarah was shaking my shoulder, but I could barely hear her over the roaring in my ears. The roaring that wasn't real. The roaring that happened over 300 years ago. That was 6 months ago. The day I remembered how I died. My name now is irrelevant. But in 1692, in Salem Village, Massachusetts, I was Eleanor Whitmore. I was 28 years old. I was a midwife, a healer, a woman who knew how to turn a breech baby and brew tea that could ease a fever. And for that, they burned me alive. I should have known something was wrong with me long before that day in the candle shop. The signs were always there, like whispers I'd been ignoring my entire life. I've been terrified of fire since childhood, not the normal caution everyone has, but a visceral, panic-inducing terror that made my parents worry. I couldn't be near fireplaces. Birthday candles made me nauseous. The smell of anything burning sent me into cold sweats. When I was 7, my mother tried to teach me to roast marshmallows over a campfire. I screamed so loud that the entire campground came running, convinced someone was being murdered. I couldn't explain why. I just knew that fire meant death. Fire meant the end. Then there were the nightmares. Always the same. Darkness, wooden walls closing in, voices chanting outside, and smoke. So much smoke that I'd wake up choking, gasping for air in my comfortable suburban bedroom. But I pushed it all down. Therapy for childhood trauma, they said. Anxiety disorder. Nothing that Prozac couldn't handle. Until Salem. Sarah had insisted on the trip. "Come on, it's October. Salem in October. It'll be fun, witchy season, spooky tours, Instagram content." She'd been planning it for months, and I'd agreed because I loved her and because I'd convinced myself that facing my weird fire phobia in the town literally famous for burning witches might be, ironically, therapeutic. I was so wrong. We arrived on a gray October afternoon, the kind where the sky looks bruised and the air tastes like rain. The streets were packed with tourists in witch hats, taking selfies outside the museums, laughing. Everyone was laughing, but as soon as I stepped onto the cobblestones of Essex Street, something inside me cracked. I knew this place, not from history books or documentaries. I knew it, the way you know your childhood home in the dark. The way your body remembers a path your feet have walked 1,000 times. "You good?" Sarah asked, noticing I'd stopped walking. "Yeah," I lied, "just taking it in." But I wasn't taking anything in. I was remembering. Fragments were starting to surface, like debris floating up from a shipwreck at the bottom of my mind. We walked past a building that's now a gift shop. But in my mind's eye, I saw it differently, smaller, simpler, with a handmade wooden sign I couldn't quite read but somehow knew said, "Blacksmith." I could smell the iron. Hear the hammer striking metal. "That was never a blacksmith," I whispered. "What?" Sarah turned. "Nothing." My hands were shaking. The next morning, we took the official tour. The guide was enthusiastic, theatrical, telling the story of the trials like it was a Halloween tale. 20 people were executed, he said. 14 women and 6 men. 19 hanged, 1 pressed to death under stones. But contrary to popular belief, he announced with a smile, no one was actually burned at the stake in Salem. The world tilted. I heard myself say, "That's not true." Everyone turned to look at me. The guide's smile flickered. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's not," I stopped. What was I saying? Of course no one was burned in Salem. That was historical fact. Burning was a European practice. The Salem executions were by hanging. But I could feel it. The heat, the smoke, the rope around my wrists, not my neck. Sarah grabbed my arm. "You okay? You look really pale." "I need air," I managed. I stumbled away from the group, down a narrow street I'd never been on but somehow knew led to the old cemetery. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might be having a heart attack. My vision was blurring, and not with tears, with images that weren't mine but absolutely were. I saw a woman's hands, my hands, grinding dried herbs in a wooden bowl. I saw the interior of a small cottage with a dirt floor and a fireplace that I fed carefully, always carefully, because fire was a tool but also a danger. I saw faces. A pregnant woman gripping my hand in labor, her screams of pain turning to cries of joy when I placed her baby in her arms. An old man whose fever I'd broken with willow bark tea. A young boy whose broken arm I'd set, telling him to be brave, to breathe. And then other faces, darker ones. A man with cold eyes and a silver cross. A woman I'd once called friend, her face twisted with something that looked like triumph. A magistrate reading from a paper while villagers watched, hungry for blood. Thou art accused of witchcraft. I collapsed onto a bench, gasping. A kind tourist asked if I needed help, if I should call someone. I waved them away, pressing my palms against my eyes. That's when the first full memory hit. It came like a movie playing on the inside of my eyelids, but I wasn't watching it. I was living it. I was Eleanor Whitmore, 28 years old, though in 1692 that made me practically a spinster. Unmarried by choice, much to the village's gossip and concern. A woman who lived alone in a small cottage on the edge of Salem village was suspect enough, but a woman who knew healing. Who could stop bleeding with pressure and the right herbs? Who whispered prayers over the sick and saw them recover? That was dangerous. I saw my life there, not the dramatic parts yet, but the simple, daily existence. I woke with the sun, fed the chickens I kept behind my cottage, drew water from the well. I spent my mornings tending my garden, feverfew, chamomile, lavender, sage, and dozens of other plants I'd learned from my own mother, who'd learned from hers, going back generations of women who understood that God put medicine in the earth for those wise enough to find it. I remembered the feeling of dirt under my fingernails, the ache in my lower back from bending over plants, the satisfaction of a basket full of fresh herbs. I remembered the weight of my long skirts, the way my hair, dark brown, almost black, would escape from my cap and stick to my sweaty neck in summer. I remembered being happy, mostly. The villagers came to me in secret, especially the women. When the minister's wife had a fever that wouldn't break, she came to me, not to her husband's prayers. When Sarah Good, yes, the same Sarah Good who would later be executed, had a baby stuck sideways in her belly, it was me who reached inside and turned that child, saving both their lives. I charged nothing. Sometimes they brought me eggs, or bread, or cloth. Sometimes they brought nothing but thanks, which was enough. But I wasn't alone. There was Thomas. Oh God, Thomas. Sitting on that bench in present-day Salem, I started crying, and I couldn't have explained why if someone had asked. But I knew. I remembered. Thomas Warren, the carpenter, 32 years old, with calloused hands and brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled. We'd known each other since childhood, had that easy friendship that bloomed, slowly, into something else. Something we kept secret because he was meant to marry Rebecca Osborne, a match arranged by his father to merge properties. But it was me he loved. Me he came to see in the evenings, when the work was done and darkness gave us privacy. Me he held in front of my fireplace, whispering plans for a future we both knew was impossible. Come away with me, he'd said one night, his face serious in the flickering firelight. Boston. We could start over. I could find work. You could. I can't, I'd whispered, touching his face. These women need me. Mrs. Turner is due in 2 months, and the baby's positioned wrong. Little James Wilkins has that cough that won't leave, and I'm the only one who knows the mixture that helps. I can't just, Eleanor. He'd kissed my forehead. You can't save everyone. But I had to try. That was who I was. I remembered the texture of his coat. The smell of sawdust that always clung to him. The way he'd pull me close and I'd feel, for just a moment, safe. I didn't know then that love would be part of my undoing. I must have sat on that bench for an hour, lost in the memories that kept flooding back. Sarah found me eventually, worried and confused. What's going on with you? She asked, sitting beside me. How could I explain? How could I tell my rational, scientific-minded best friend that I was remembering a life I'd lived 300 years ago? That I'd died here? That I'd burned here? I think I need to go home, was all I managed. But I didn't go home. Not yet. Over the next 3 days, I walked the streets of Salem like a ghost haunting her own past. I went to the memorial where the names of the executed are engraved in stone. I found Sarah Good, and Rebecca Nurse, and others, but of course, I didn't find Eleanor Whitmore. Because officially, I never existed. The tour guide had been right, no one was burned in Salem. The 19 who were executed died by hanging. One man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death. But no one burned. Except that wasn't the whole truth, I realized. The official executions were one thing. But Salem Village in 1692 was a place of hysteria and mob violence, of scores being settled under the guise of godliness. Not every death was recorded. Not every killing was official. I went to the library, the Peabody Essex Museum's Phillips Library, and requested historical records. The librarian, a patient older woman named Margaret, brought me boxes of documents. "Looking for someone specific?" she asked. "Eleanor Whitmore," I said. 1692. She clicked through her computer database, then shook her head. "Nothing comes up for that name. Could be a variant spelling? Whitman? Whitfield? Try Thomas Warren." Her eyebrows rose. "Thomas Warren, yes. Carpenter. Married Rebecca Osborne in 1693. Father of 4 children. Died in 1731. Married Rebecca in 1693. 1 year after I died." The room spun. Margaret was asking if I was okay, but I couldn't answer. My chest felt like it was being crushed. Thomas had married her, moved on, had children, lived a whole life after I what? After I died? After I was murdered? That night, alone in my hotel room while Sarah slept in the other bed, I let myself remember the rest. All of it. The parts I'd been avoiding because I knew they would break me. And they did. Winter, 1692. January, I think, or early February. The cold was bitter, the kind that got into your bones and wouldn't leave. I'd been treating Ann Putnam's daughter for a cough, little Ann Jr., only 12 years old but already learning to be as cruel as her mother. I'd given them elderberry syrup and instructions to keep her warm and rested. The cough improved, but something else started, the fits. Ann Jr. and several other girls, Abigail Williams, Betty Paris, and others, began having what they called afflictions. They screamed, they contorted, they claimed to see specters, ghosts of witches tormenting them. And they named names. Sarah Good, the beggar woman I'd helped birth her baby. Sarah Osborne, who was old and sick and hadn't been to meeting in over a year. Tituba, the enslaved woman from the minister's household. But they didn't name me. Not yet. I remembered warning Thomas. We'd met in secret at the mill, where the sound of rushing water would mask our voices. "You need to be careful," he'd said, his hands on my shoulders. "The magistrates are taking this seriously. People are being arrested." "I haven't done anything wrong," I'd said. "I help people. I heal the sick. That's God's work, not the devil's." "Eleanor." His voice was urgent. "You're an unmarried woman who lives alone and practices medicine. In their eyes, that's already suspicious. And if those girls name you, they won't." But I was wrong. It was Rebecca who betrayed me first. Rebecca Osborne, Thomas's intended. I'd helped her once, when she'd twisted her ankle badly. I'd wrapped it, given her something for the pain. She'd thanked me then, smiled at me. But she knew about Thomas and me. Someone had seen us together, whispered it to her. And her shame became rage, became accusation. She went to Ann Putnam, not the child, but the mother, who was the true poison in that village. And together, they crafted a story. I remembered the morning they came for me. March 2, 1692. I was in my garden, checking which plants had survived the winter, when I heard horses. 4 men, including John Hathorne, the magistrate. "Eleanor Whitmore," he'd said, not even dismounting. "You are accused of witchcraft. You will come with us." My hands had been in the dirt. There was mud under my fingernails. I stood slowly, my heart beginning to race. Accused by whom? That will be revealed at your examination. Come peacefully, or we will take you by force. I looked beyond them and saw villagers gathering. People I'd helped. Mrs. Turner, whose baby I'd saved, she was there, her face carefully blank. Jonathan Wilkins, whose son's cough I'd cured, he wouldn't meet my eyes. And Rebecca, standing with her arms crossed, her face a mask of righteous satisfaction. Thomas was nowhere to be seen. They took me to the meeting house. The girls were there, Anne, Abigail, Betty, and others. They writhed and screamed when I entered, claiming my specter was pinching them, biting them, torturing them. I have done nothing to these children, I said, my voice steady despite my terror. I have never harmed anyone. You are a witch, Anne shrieked. I see your shape, the devil's shape. Hathorne leaned forward. Eleanor Whitmore, do you deny practicing witchcraft? I deny it absolutely. I am a Christian woman. I help the sick. I deliver babies. You practice medicine without authority, he interrupted. You brew potions and speak incantations. Prayers, I corrected. I speak prayers. And the plants I use are God's creation, put on this earth for healing. Rebecca Osborne testifies that you used supernatural means to discover her injury before she told you of it. That you knew things you could not have known naturally. I looked at Rebecca. She stared back, her chin high. She's lying, I said quietly. Are you calling this good Christian woman a liar? The trap was perfect. If I said yes, I was calling her a liar. If I said no, I was admitting to supernatural knowledge. I knew of her injury because she was limping, I said. Anyone could see it, but they weren't listening. The girls were screaming louder now, claiming to see my specter with the devil. And then Ann Putnam the elder stood. She came to my house, she declared. She gave my daughter something to drink, and that's when the afflictions began. She has cursed my child. I gave her elderberry syrup to help her cough. Poison, Anne hissed. Witch's poison. The examination lasted hours. They asked me to recite the Lord's Prayer. I did, perfectly, but they claimed I stumbled on a word, I hadn't. They examined my body for witches' marks. Any mole or birthmark could be evidence of suckling demons. The humiliation of being stripped and studied by strangers while the magistrates watched was almost worse than the fear. They found a small mole on my inner thigh. Evidence, they declared. A devil's mark. It's just a mole. I'd screamed. You're all insane. You're seeing devils where there are none. That was my mistake. Calling them insane. Showing anger instead of the meek submission they expected. Hathorne's eyes went cold. Take her to Salem prison. She will await trial. I sat in my hotel room, tears streaming down my face, living through the memory of those months in prison. The present-day room around me, with its comfortable bed, its climate control, its electric lights, felt impossibly distant. The prison was hell. A literal hell before the hell that was coming. It wasn't designed for long-term imprisonment, just to hold people until trial or execution. The cells were small, damp, freezing in winter. We were shackled at the ankles and wrists, the metal biting into our skin until we bled and the wounds infected. I was put in a cell with Sarah Good and her 4-year-old daughter, little Dorcas. Yes, they arrested a 4-year-old child. The same baby I'd helped bring into the world was now in chains because she'd been accused of witchcraft. Sarah Good had already been broken by the time I arrived. Her baby, the one born just after her little daughter, had died in prison from neglect and cold. Sarah rocked back and forth, humming tunelessly, her eyes vacant. He'll come, I'd whispered to myself in those early days. Thomas will come. He'll help. He believes me. But Thomas didn't come. Days passed. Weeks. The only visitors were the magistrates, coming to pressure confessions. They told us that those who confessed were spared. Those who maintained innocence were executed. Just confess, they'd say. Admit you signed the devil's book. Name your accomplices. Save your soul and your life. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. To confess to a lie felt like betraying everything I was. If I died, I would die with the truth. One day in April. I don't remember the exact date because time had lost all meaning in that dark hole. A guard came and told me I had a visitor. For one wild moment, my heart soared. Thomas. finally. But it was Rebecca. She stood on the other side of the bars, clean and well-dressed while I was filthy and wasting away. She looked at me like I was something that had crawled out of a grave. "I wanted you to know," she said quietly, "that Thomas and I are to be married in May." The words hit like a physical blow. "You're lying," I whispered. "He chose me," she continued, and there was something almost pitying in her voice. "He always was going to. You were just a distraction. A sin he needed to purge. And now you're here, and he's free of you. Did he send you here? To tell me this?" "No," she smiled. "He doesn't know I came. I just wanted to see you like this. To know that you understand. You were never going to have him. You were always going to end here." She left, and something inside me shattered. Later, weeks later, I think, another prisoner told me the truth. Thomas had been the one to report seeing us together. Under pressure from his father and the magistrates, he'd admitted to succumbing to a witch's temptations. He'd painted me as a seductress who'd used supernatural means to ensnare him. He'd sold me out to save himself. The man I loved had condemned me. Sitting in that hotel room, I was sobbing so hard I woke Sarah up. She held me while I couldn't explain, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but remember. The trial was a mockery. More spectral evidence, the girls screaming and convulsing. More testimony about my suspicious healing practices. Thomas didn't testify directly, but his written statement was read aloud, that he believed I had bewitched him into sinful behavior. I was found guilty. The sentence, death by hanging. But that's not how I died. Here's what the history books don't record, what never made it into official documents. Salem Village in 1692 was a place where mob justice sometimes preceded official justice. The night before I was scheduled to be transported to Gallows Hill for execution, something happened at the prison. A group of men, I never knew all of them, but I recognized some voices, came in the darkness. They'd been drinking. One of them was related to Ann Putnam. Another was a man whose wife I'd failed to save in childbirth 2 years earlier. They wanted immediate justice. God's justice, they called it. The guard, whether through bribery or sympathy with them, I never knew, looked away. They dragged me from my cell. Sarah Good screamed. Little Dorcas cried. I fought, but I was weak from months of imprisonment, malnutrition, and despair. They took me to a field outside the village. Someone had already built a pyre, rough wood piled high, with a post in the center. They'd planned this. Witches burn, someone said. This is how it's done in Scotland. In Germany, this is how we purify the land. They tied me to the post. I begged. God, I begged. I screamed for help that didn't come. I prayed. I cried. I saw Thomas in the crowd. He was there, watching. His face pale, his jaw tight, but he was there, and he said nothing. He did nothing. Our eyes met across the fire they were building around my feet, and I saw everything I needed to know. He'd loved me, yes. But he'd loved his own safety more. His reputation, his future. And I knew in that moment, as the torch touched the kindling, that this betrayal would follow me forever. The fire started slow, then grew fast. The smoke came first, thick, black, choking. I coughed, gasped, my eyes burning. Some part of my mind thought, the smoke will kill me before the flames. That's a mercy. But it wasn't. The heat was unimaginable. I felt my skin blister, then char. I felt my hair catch fire. The pain was so intense that I screamed until my throat gave out, until I couldn't scream anymore, could only make raw, animal sounds of agony. I smelled my own flesh burning. And through it all, through the worst pain imaginable, I kept my eyes on Thomas. Watching him, knowing he would have to live with this. Knowing that in some future life, in some other time, I would remember. And I would never forgive. The last thing I felt was the rope around my wrists burning through. My body collapsed forward into the flames. And then, mercy, finally, nothing. I left Salem the next morning. Sarah thought I was having some kind of breakdown, and maybe I was. But it wasn't the kind she thought. For weeks after, the memories kept coming. In dreams. In flashbacks triggered by smells or sounds. The feel of rough rope. The taste of smoke. The betrayal in Thomas's eyes. But also the good memories. The satisfaction of delivering a healthy baby. The peace of my garden in summer. The brief, bright joy of being loved, even if that love was false. I started researching obsessively. I found records of Thomas Warren, his marriage to Rebecca in 1693, just months after I died. Their children, 4 of them, prosperous lives. Thomas died in 1731 at age 71. A good long life. A life he got to live while I burned. I couldn't find any record of Eleanor Whitmore. No death record, no trial record. That execution, that murder, was never written down. I was erased from history. But I remembered, and that's why I'm telling this story. Because I need people to know that I existed. That I was real. That I was a woman who tried to help people, and I was murdered for it. I've had to deal with some hard truths since remembering this life. The fear of fire that plagued me my whole childhood? Not irrational. A memory encoded so deeply that it crossed lifetimes. The dreams of smoke and darkness? Not anxiety, truth. And the strange thing, the thing I'm still processing, is that some of Eleanor is still in me. I'm drawn to healing professions. I'm in nursing school now, which I'd always thought was just a career choice. But maybe it's who I've always been, across lifetimes. I'm drawn to herbs and natural medicine in a way that feels instinctive, not learned. And I have a visceral, immediate distrust of mobs, of group hysteria, of people who claim to speak for God while condemning others. Because I've seen where that leads. I've felt where that leads. A few months ago, I went back to Salem. By myself this time. I walked to the field where I think it happened. It's developed now, houses and shops, but I stood there anyway. I remember you, I whispered. Eleanor Whitmore. I remember you existed. I remember you mattered. And I swear I felt something loosen in my chest. Like a knot that had been tied for 331 years finally, slowly, began to unravel. I don't know if I believe in reincarnation in the traditional sense. I don't know if Eleanor's soul is my soul, or if somehow I accessed her memories, or if this is all some elaborate construction my mind created to explain childhood trauma. But I know this. When I lit a candle last week, for the first time in my life, I didn't panic. I watched the flame, and yes, I cried. But I also felt something like peace. Eleanor died in fire. But I'm here, living, free, able to tell her story. Maybe that's redemption. Maybe that's justice, centuries late. Or maybe it's just the simple truth that some souls are stronger than the flames that tried to destroy them. If you've ever had an irrational fear that you can't explain, of heights, of water, of enclosed spaces, of fire, maybe it's not so irrational after all. Maybe your soul remembers what your mind has forgotten. If you've ever felt immediately, inexplicably connected to a place you've never been, or a time you never lived through, maybe you did live through it. Just in a different body. A different life. I don't have all the answers. I don't know for sure if Eleanor and I are the same soul, or if I somehow tapped into the memory of a woman who died centuries ago. But I know that remembering her changed me. It made me understand that the fears we carry might be wisdom in disguise. That the things that terrify us might be trying to tell us something important about who we've been and what we've survived. And I know that history is written by those who survive to write it. But there are other stories, whispered stories, forgotten stories, stories that live in the spaces between official records. Eleanor Whitmore's story was one of those. And now, through me, she gets to tell it. To every woman who was called a witch for being too smart, too independent, too skilled at her craft, I remember you. To every person who was destroyed by group hysteria, by fear masquerading as righteousness, by betrayal disguised as faith, I remember you. And to anyone listening who feels that strange pull toward a time they never knew, a place they've never been, a fear they can't explain, maybe your soul is trying to tell you something. Maybe you should listen, because the past isn't really past. Not when it lives in us. Not when it shapes who we are, who we've always been. My name now doesn't matter. But 331 years ago, my name was Eleanor Whitmore. And I was here. I existed. I mattered. And no fire could burn that truth away.